What's up, guys? My name is Zen, and in this video broadcast, I want to share with you guys what is ZenCash. I got some questions from some folks. They said, hey, you keep talking about Bitcoin private, you keep talking about Bitcoin and Z Classic. There's that other fork called ZenCash that you keep mentioning, but you never go deep into it to talk about what it is. So I want to take a moment right here, guys, and share with you guys what I know and what I learned about ZenCash. But before I do, I have to share with you guys a quick disclaimer that I am not a licensed financial advisor, and everything that I share with you guys here about ZenCash is for informational and educational purposes and entertainment purposes only, right? So our team invests in ZenCash, so everything that I say here about ZenCash, you can expect that there's going to be an inherent conflict of interest because we are supporters of ZenCash. Okay, so, all right, quick history of ZenCash. As I mentioned before, guys, Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency that was invented by an individual named Satoshi Nakamoto. We do not know if that person is a man or a woman, but Satoshi Nakamoto invented this distributed ledger and blockchain technology called Bitcoin. And after it was invented, there were people that wanted to add privacy, 100% privacy to it, so that no one knows who the sender is, the recipient is, or the quantity of the financial transaction. And they tried to add it to Bitcoin, but they were unsuccessful, so they took the Bitcoin software, made a copy of it, and created what's called Zcash. And then this Zcash project, when the private investors created Zcash, what they did was they had it set up so that the software, every time a new Zcash token was created, it would take 20% of it and direct it and put it into a fund that was available to the founders. So this is what we call the founders reward, 20% of Zcash. And then there were people in the cryptocurrency community that was not happy that they created this coin and took 20% off the top of every new coin that was minted. So they forked it off and they created what's called Z Classic, which is the exact same thing as Zcash, except 20 lines of code were removed by the Z Classic founder, and his name was Rex Creighton. He's a computer scientist out of MIT. And when he removed that 20% founder's reward, and he created what's called Z Classic. Now, when Z Classic started building up a community, there were people in the Z Classic community that realized that if we don't have some type of funding mechanism, we're not going to be able to hire the right people the engineers to work on the software, and we're not going to be able to do the marketing to get users and get adoption and get a mainstream adoption of this technology. So what they did was they took the copy of Z Classic and they forked it off and they created a new cryptocurrency called ZenCash. Right? And they solved two massive problems that was facing Bitcoin and Z Classic. And those two problems are the lack of funding, some type of funding mechanism to help pay for the development and the marketing of the project. And the second one is a lack of governance. And a governance means that it is a final decision-making and implementation process, so that when a large community of thousands of people want to upgrade the software in a particular manner, there is a formal way to vote on that update of which one they want and then how it gets implemented, right? So that process of deciding on what the upgrade is and implementing it is, the technical term for it is called a governance, okay? Now, a lot of times when you say the word governance in the cryptocurrency space, a lot of people think that you're talking about government, right? A governance can involve a government, but it's not necessary, right? It's just a final decision-making process, an implementation process, or a conflict resolution process. So that's what a governance is, right? So what ZenCash did was they attempted to branch off of Z Classic and solve those two massive problems that was facing Z Classic, right? So what is ZenCash? ZenCash was launched on May 30th, 2017, and one of the problems they wanted to solve was the funding issue. So what happens is that in Bitcoin, all the new coins that are minted go 100% of the coins go to the miners, the people who volunteer their computers to process and secure, process all the Bitcoin transactions and secure the network, right? But in the ZenCash blockchain, what happens is that only 88% go to the miners who volunteer their computers. The other 12% is split up, where 8.5% goes to the mining rewards, go to a fund to work on, to hire software engineers for marketing and for operations of the ZenCash project. And then 3.5% goes to the ZenCash secured nodes. And these are special nodes that are slightly different from the mining nodes. These nodes do special tasks that are in addition to the miner nodes. And so they're rewarded that 3.5% to do that extra task, right? And then the block time of this are 2.5 minutes, just like the ZenCash, the Z Classic. And the reward halving is at every 4 years. It's the same as Bitcoin, right? And it has a zero knowledge encryption, which allows private economic activity where the recipient and the senders and the amount of the financial transaction is kept confidential, and not too many people know about it, right? So it uses the same hashing or mining algorithm as Z Classic called Equihash, and the 21 million tokens total supply, just like in Bitcoin, right? And what they did was they solved a huge governance problem in Bitcoin and in Z Classic. So now, if someone in the community wants to do something to help improve the ZenCash network or the protocol, they can submit a formal proposal to their governance system and request funding. So, for example, if I needed $1,000 to rent this meeting space so that I can do this conference on ZenCash, then what I would do is I would submit that proposal to them, tell them what I needed the money for, I'm requesting the money for, and then where am I going to do it at, and then how many people I expect to be here, and the things like that. And what I'm doing is I'm bringing in and submitting that proposal. Once I submit it to them, what's going to happen is that the community, everyone that owns a ZenCash token, can vote on that proposal that I submit. And when they vote on it, and there's a majority that agrees on it, what happens is the ZenCash network automatically sends me the ZenCash tokens to the address that I put into the proposal. And then I receive that $1,000 worth of ZenCash tokens, I can go sell it, and then I can pay for the rental of this space, all right? So that's what the proposal system does, and that's what the governance system does, is it allows the entire community that owns the ZenCash tokens to vote on the proposals that are submitted to the network. And this is a huge innovation because it allows the community to vote on what they want done to the project. So if, let's say that JB and Regan, they want to talk about privacy, and JB wants to educate the ZenCash community with her investing and trading knowledge or experience, what she can do is she can submit a proposal to them, and if enough people in her proposal, if she makes enough conviction and persuades the community that this is good for the community, then the majority of the community will vote on the proposal, and each lady will get the funding to do that project. Okay, so this is a huge innovation. Now, I want you guys to know that ZenCash is not the only one that has a proposal or a governance system. The first cryptocurrency that's well known to do that is a project called Dash Pay, and they were the first projects to create a governance system where people in the community can submit proposals and then it can get accepted. Now, just so you guys know, to prevent people from submitting this random spam proposal for a bunch of junk, it does require a fee, and each cryptocurrency that has a proposal or a governance system has a different fee. Like, for example, like the Dash proposal, I think the last time I checked, it requires like $5,000 worth of Dash for you to submit the proposal. So if you want to do something to help promote that community or market it or build software to help improve their project, then you're going to have to include the proposal with the $5,000 proposal fee, just to prevent people from spamming the network. Now, obviously, ZenCash and projects like ZenCash and Pivx and projects like that, Pivx is another privacy coin project. They're newer, They're younger, so their proposal system requires a smaller fee. So you'll have to check each system. I don't remember off the top of my head what the fee is for each proposal in their governance project systems, but each one has a different fee for that. Okay, so all right. So hopefully that was able to help you guys understand how the ZenCash works and how it solved the funding and the governance issue that was prevalent in Bitcoin and Z Classic. Now I'm going to take some questions from the audience. Yes, Rob.
What is the difference between ZenCash and Bitcoin Private?
Okay, the difference between, so that's a great question that you just asked there. Let me go back here. So Rob's question is, what is the difference between ZenCash and Bitcoin Private? The difference is that Bitcoin Private is a fork, both are a fork of Z Classic, but one solves the two nagging problems that Bitcoin has, which is the lack of funding mechanism or system to fund the project development. And so ZenCash solved that problem by having 8.5% and 3.5% go into a separate pool just for development. And then they also solve the governance problem where the community can submit the proposal to help improve the network. Whereas Bitcoin Private does not have that funding mechanism and it does not have that governance mechanism.
Well, I understand that, but why, okay, so why is REP concerned about governance if it's already implemented in other coins and successful?
Okay, so that's a great question. Why the Rex Creighton, the computer scientist that created Bitcoin Private, why didn't he implement the governance into it? And the funding? Well, he thought that would be an issue because remember, he created Z Classic to remove the funding. You know, he didn't believe that you should skim off the top, right? And so myself and many others in the Z Classic community and the Bitcoin Private community have suggested to him that he needs to implement a funding mechanism so that Bitcoin Private can survive in the future, right? And the difference is that 10 or 15% or 20% that comes off of Bitcoin Private, it needs to go into a community pool where it gets voted on by the community. See, Rex had an issue with that 20% that came off of Zcash. It went into a pool that was only held by the founders of Zcash and their private investors. It was not for the entire community. So there's a huge difference there when you take 20% off the top for the private investors versus take 20% off for the entire community to vote on how they can use that money to make the project better.
But that's the current case, right? If it's just 5 members holding the keys,
yes.
It's kind of similar to a group of founders.
Yes, that's exactly, that's my point. That's why in the comment that you just made is, for the audience at home, is that, you know, isn't Bitcoin Private the same thing because they have 5 committee members holding the keys and the funding for the entire project? And the answer is yes. That is correct. There's only a small handful of people get to decide where that money gets to be used. And that's the part that when I was talking about Bitcoin Private, one of the challenges one of the problems with Bitcoin Private is that the funding mechanism, there is none, right? They had a donation of $1 to $2 million, and once that runs out, where are they going to get more money to build a project and pay for development? And then who gets to decide how that money gets used? In ZenCash and in Pivot and in Dash, the community votes on where that money goes. So it's not like a small handful of 5 people, what I call the good old boys club, that gets to vote on how they get to use that money, right?
So what's the status
of Bitcoin Private?
Yeah.
The Bitcoin Private right now does not have a governance system and does not have a funding mechanism.
Are they planning to?
I talked to the guys, and there's no indications that they are going to implement a funding mechanism or a governance mechanism.
So how is Bitcoin Private an improvement from ZenCash, or is it?
How is Bitcoin Private better or an improvement over ZenCash?
Correct.
The advantage that Bitcoin Private has is that they airdrop the Bitcoin Private tokens on every Bitcoin holder's account. And there's millions of people with Bitcoin. There's not a million people with ZenCash tokens. So right off the bat, Bitcoin Private has a way bigger community. So even if you did not support Bitcoin Private, you got some Bitcoin Privates now in your Bitcoin wallet. So it's hard for you to not want the project to succeed. Make sense? Whereas ZenCash, in order to get ZenCash, you actually have to go out there and buy the ZenCash tokens. Whereas if you have Bitcoin or you have Z Classic already in your wallet, then you automatically get the Bitcoin Private.
And ZenCash is traded on the big exchanges?
Yes, ZenCash is traded on the big exchanges.
So there's an advantage for ZenCash over Bitcoin Private at the moment.
So your comment is that ZenCash has an advantage over Bitcoin Private simply because it's traded on a major exchange and Bitcoin Private is not. Yes, that is one way to look at it, but the majority of the community in the Bitcoin Private community, they believe that Bitcoin Private has more value because there's a bigger community. So the bigger community pretty much overrides a lot of the other features that a coin can have. Everybody wants a big community. Yes.
So that would lead me to believe because Rhett was involved in the creation of ZenCash, correct?
No, Rhett Sprayton was not involved in the creation of ZenCash.
Oh, I misunderstood.
ZenCash was created by members of the Z Classic community, and they branched off and created it. They asked, they told Rhett they asked him to implement a funding in a governance system, and Rhett did not want to do that. He said, I want Z Classic to be clean, no funding. It does not have the founders' rewards in there, and that's why I made Z Classic 4, was to remove that 20%, find a founders' reward, for the private investors, and that's it. If you want to do something else with it, then fork off on your own and create your new coin and add whatever you want to it. But Z Classic is going to stay Z Classic.
So the impetus of Bitcoin Private versus Z Classic was basically to increase the community.
Yes, to increase the community and to add privacy to Bitcoin. Because that's something that everybody in Bitcoin wants, but there's no privacy.
Right.
Yes.
So as an investor in both of these coins, for you, what's your concern regarding the team? How they want to manage their time to kind of go forward with the two projects at the same time?
Okay, so for which team?
Well, it's the same team, right? The Z Classic and the Bitcoin Private team.
Okay, so the team that is developing the Bitcoin Private, they are completely separate from the team that built ZenCash, and they are in the process of looking for a different team to update the Z Classic software while they focus on Bitcoin Private. So Bitcoin Private is over here. ZenCash is over here. None of the teams have anything to do with each other. They just use the same code base.
Yeah, it's not the same team.
And the same between Z Classic and Bitcoin Private. Bitcoin Private team moved completely over, and now somebody's trying to take over on the 10 page.
Okay, so the question is Bitcoin Private and Z Classic the same team? At the moment, yes. At the moment, the same team that builds Z Classic and Bitcoin Private are the same team. However, the Bitcoin Private team is trying to move away from it, and they want to find somebody else. They're offering to hand off the development of Z Classic onto someone else that's qualified by submitting a proposal and discussing how they're going to improve Z Classic or continue to maintain it. And then once they get approved, then they'll hand off that responsibility to them.
Is Z Classic traded on a big exchange? On a major exchange?
Z Classic is traded on Bittrex, which is a major exchange.
So how come they didn't airdrop into that coin also besides the Bitcoin?
They did.
Oh, they did.
They did.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's yes. The question is, did Bitcoin Private airdrop into Z Classic tokens? The answer is yes.
Oh yeah, that's right. You said that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and that was the innovation.
Right.
They were the first. Bitcoin Private was the first project to airdrop on two separate coins simultaneously, which is Z Classic and Bitcoin. So if you were an owner of Z Classic or an owner of Bitcoin, each one you would get a Bitcoin Private token, one for one of each of the tokens that you have. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
I do have one more.
Yes.
Okay, so
about ZenCash?
Well, the whole thing is about privacy, right?
Okay, yes.
I read this article. People was going to ask or point out about like the government start going to take a very close look to the privacy coins, especially the Monero.
Yes.
Because, for us, we want to use those coins for good things. Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys out there that want to use for the bad stuff.
Yes.
So what's your point of view of the government just kind of put their nose in this?
The question is, what are my thoughts on the government investigating all these privacy coin projects, like especially with Monero, because they're being used a lot to buy drugs and stuff in the dark net market, correct? Okay, so my thought is this, these are all open source projects, meaning that there's no central body or team that actually builds it. So there's a team that builds ZenCash, there's a team that builds Bitcoin private, but if you were to go and remove that team, somebody else would just fill the gap and start developing it, right? So it's not really, it's one of those things where it's like, they can say, if the government decides they want to stop the use of privacy coins, I don't see how that can be done, because people can still use it. They can't stop the network, because as long as somebody leaves one computer running to process the Monero transactions or the ZenCash transactions or the Bitcoin private transactions, as long as somebody's leaving their computer on to process the transactions, the network is still alive. And because there's thousands of people out there that are processing, leaving their computers running to process these transactions, it's extremely difficult to turn it off. Because the guys that are volunteering their computers to process the ZenCash transactions, they're getting rewarded for that. They're getting rewarded. Why would they turn off their computers? Right? So if you're getting rewarded well, right, and the reward you get is more than the cost of electricity that it takes to run those computers, then you would continue running it. And the way that the privacy coins are set up is that, my understanding is that no matter where you're at, as long as you're processing the transactions and you get rewarded, you're not going to be able to be identified, especially if you go through using a Tor browser or the browsers that obfuscate where your IP addresses are coming from. Then it's going to be extremely difficult for anyone to track who is using it and who's not. Because remember that technology, that's what it was designed for. So the technologies like ZenCash, right, it was designed so that in Asia we call it treating a poison with a poison, right? The government is using technology to violate our privacy rights. So what you do is we develop a technology that beats that system, where even if they are spying on us, they can't see what the transactions are. Make sense? So that's the goal of all these privacy coins like ZenCash, like Z Classic, like Bitcoin Private, like Zcash, Monero, Pivot, Particle, what else? Cloak Coin, yeah, that's another one. So these are all projects designed to obfuscate or make unreadable, unlegible, right, illegible, the financial transaction, so that each human being can maintain their financial privacy, right? So, any other questions, guys? Great questions that you guys are asking there about the privacy coins.
Yeah, I think the only way they can affect this is exchanges. The off-ramps and on-ramps, the governments can mess with those, but they can mess with the money and...
So Eric's comment is that the only way that the government, that he can see that the government affecting the privacy coins is affecting the on and off ramps, where people are transacting, making the transactions at the exchanges, where they have your name and your username, your address, your personal identity. Then they can tie in that, hey, that you're the person that's using these privacy coin transactions. But if you use it outside the network, then there's really no way that someone can determine that. Not at the moment anyway.
Yeah, that's why we need the decentralized exchange.
Exactly, that's the future. Decentralized exchanges.
The future, yes, a lot of people are saying that the future is decentralized exchanges, but the challenge with that is not user-friendly and it's very low liquidity. And that's what JB was saying, right? The whole time she was up here, she was saying, hey, be careful about trading something that has no liquidity and no volume, because you can't get in and get out whenever you want to. If you're long and you decide, hey, I want to get out, and there's not enough volume for you to get out, right? Most decentralized exchanges that I have used, it's extremely difficult to get in and out with like 10 or 20 or 50 or $100,000 with the cryptocurrency. They're good for like maybe 100, 200, 1,000 bucks, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 bucks, but it's not good to make like a $100,000 transaction to come in and out. So like JB was saying, like in the futures market, she can come in with $100,000 worth or come out with just a click of a mouse. Whereas, you know, like something that has low liquidity, it's not easy to do that, and it's not safe, is what she was saying earlier. So I would, someone that's experienced like that, and they're warning you that, hey, be careful and about looking at the exchange that have low liquidity, then I would take heed of it. Especially someone that has already lost money doing that, and they're telling you, hey, that doesn't work, right? I would listen to that. There's an old Chinese saying that says that, a smart man learns from his own mistakes, right? And then a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. Whether you're a man or a woman, the stuff that JD was talking about, how low liquidity or low volume can drastically increase the risk in your trade, that is something that, you want to be wise about and listen to her and learn from her mistakes. Right? So,
is Pivx truly a private coin or is it traceable?
Okay, so the question is, Pivx truly a private coin or is it traceable? Now, here's the thing that you guys got to understand, okay? How old is blockchain technology?
9 years.
It's about, yes, it came out in January 2009. 2009 was the first time that Bitcoin was born. And after that, all the other cryptocurrencies were born after that. So we're in 2018 right now, so that's what, 9 years you say? Right? Okay, so in 9 years, have we had enough research, enough testing, and enough attacks on the privacy coins such as Pivx or ZenCash or Bitcoin Private or Monero to really determine that it's truly 100% private? And the scary thing about privacy coins is this, guys, because it was meant to be private so no one can trace it or figure out who sent it and who received it and the amount. And one of the concerns in the cryptocurrency space is that if somebody does hack it, or if somebody does attack it, or if somebody does figure out a way to spy on you and what the transactions are, no one would know because it's supposed to be private. You guys see that? So someone right now could be minting fake Moneros or fake Pivx or fake ZenCash, and if they did, we would not know that, right? But in Bitcoin, we know that because everyone can see the transactions. So that's the downside of it. Okay, so just be aware there's a lot of good talk about privacy coins and everything, but still be aware that it's still a young technology and that there's still a lot of things that can still be at risk, right? So, any other questions?
What's your opinion on Tether? Do you think it's legit, or you think it's...
The question is, what is my opinion on Tether? So, Tether is over $1 billion market cap right now, and since it was at like around 16 or 21 million market cap, we have been, telling our clients not to mess with it and not to use it. So maybe the people that were attending our boot camps, we've been telling them since it was in the 16 and 21 million market cap range, not to mess with it, because the claim that Tether makes is that every Tether is backed up by a US dollar at some Hong Kong bank. And supposedly, my understanding is that if you can take the Tether and go to Hong Kong bank and tell them, I want the US dollar, and supposedly they'll take your Tether and they'll give you the US dollar. Now look how many people are shaking their heads, like, that sounds like a bunch of BS to me. Well, that's what we thought too. That's why we couldn't.
Well, their terms of service are saying so, right? That you cannot. It's not guaranteed that you cannot.
Yeah, but the question is this, like, how many of you guys been to Hong Kong before? Raise your hand. Like half the audience here? No, a few guys in the audience. And then, I don't know any bank in Hong Kong. Like, what am I supposed to do? Walk into that Tether bank and say, hey, I got 10 Tethers here, give me 10 US dollars? I don't believe that's really gonna work, right? So I'm not comfortable telling our clients to use that. Matter of fact, we've been telling them to stay away from it since it was in the 16, 21 million market cap range. We don't use it. And the other thing too is that on a large scale, when I'm managing a large portfolio, that doesn't work anyway, so it's irrelevant. When I had a smaller portfolio, it worked. When you're past a 7-figure portfolio, that does not. I do not find that effective at all. Okay.
Ty,
Yes.
on the release of Bitcoin Private in particular, how many Bitcoin released? Satoshi released a finite amount of coins, correct? What is Bitcoin Private doing in that respect?
Okay, the question is, Bitcoin's total supply will only ever be 21 million, and what is the total supply for Bitcoin private, and my understanding is that it's going to be around 21 million.
And broken down in the same increments?
Yeah, it's very, very similar.
Okay.
Like it's not the increments and the halving and all that, it's not that drastically different. But the idea and the process is still the same. The times are a little bit shorter, instead of 10 minutes to produce a new block on Bitcoin, right? In Bitcoin private and Z Classic, and I believe and also in ZenCash, the 2.5 minute blocks, right?
4 times faster.
Yes, it's 4 times faster, but also it's 4 times. It takes up 4 times more memory. The blockchain is bigger because it's producing a new block. And the reason why Satoshi created it so that it's a new block every 10 minutes was because it was so new. He didn't know the people on the other side of the world when it would take them to get the message. Because remember, as soon as the miner processes that Bitcoin block, he has to distribute it out to the rest of the network. And so Satoshi Nakamoto didn't know how long is it going to take for the guy on the other side of the earth to get a copy of that block so that he can start processing it, right? So he made it 10 minutes to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to get that block. Okay. So it's just a random number that he estimated that 10 minutes should be enough. And then after Bitcoin had been out for several years and they're mining 10-minute blocks, the community has realized that 10 minutes is not necessary, so they cut it down to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, so that's common. They realize, hey, it's, in theory, you're not sure, but in reality, we all know now that within just a few seconds, the block can get to the other side of the world. So that's why it's been cut very short. Okay? So, any other questions on ZenCash? All right. Thanks for joining me today, guys, on this presentation on ZenCash, and I hope that it helped you guys make more of an informed decision about what ZenCash is. And then I'll look forward to seeing you guys in a future video. If you guys like what I'm sharing with you guys, make sure you go to cryptocurrency.market/newsletter, subscribe to our newsletter, and that's where we send out more videos like this. And you guys can follow me at Hey Tai Zen, and my co-host, the Honorable Grandmaster, legendary LeonFood.com, and Leon Seafood. All right? Well, thanks, guys.